Tiberius, the second Roman emperor, reigned from AD 14 to 37. Few figures are as misunderstood. Born into Roman aristocracy, he was the stepson of Augustus. A brilliant military commander, he secured Rome's northern frontiers. His personal life included loss, and he eventually ruled from Capri. Tiberius's story examines the early Roman Empire and its transition. When Augustus died, the Roman world held its breath. Into this moment stepped Tiberius, a man seasoned by decades of military command, yet seemingly possessing none of the desire for power. The political climate Tiberius inherited was delicate. Augustus had masked his autocracy behind republican institutions. Tiberius, with his stern demeanor, struggled to manage this relationship with the Senate. Tiberius was notoriously poor at managing his public image, perceived as arrogance and contempt for the Roman people. Tiberius's inability to forge consensus meant he was constantly wary of conspiracies. He was an emperor for a new age, the first to inherit the throne. Tiberius's legacy is a study in contradictions. He was both a prudent administrator and a terrifying ruler. Early in his reign, he showed commitment to governance, curbing provincial excesses and managing the treasury well. Yet, ancient historians paint a darker picture, especially after his withdrawal to Capri. Paranoia and political purges marked this period, unleashed by Sejanus. This duality, born from pessimism and political intrigue, makes Tiberius a compelling figure. His reign is a cautionary tale about power, isolation, and the impact of psychology on governance. Any attempt to construct a balanced portrait of Tiberius is immediately confronted by a formidable obstacle: the nature of the historical sources themselves. The primary accounts of his reign were written decades, and in some cases more than a century, after his death. The most influential of these chroniclers, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio, were not neutral observers. They were men of the senatorial class, a social order that had a deeply antagonistic relationship with Tiberius. Their narratives are colored by the political biases and grievances of this elite group, which felt its power and prestige eroded under his rule. Consequently, their works often prioritize dramatic, scandalous, and damning anecdotes over a dispassionate analysis of administrative policy. Tacitus, in his masterpiece The Annals, is the most formidable and artistically powerful of these sources. He presents Tiberius as a master of dissimulation, a gloomy tyrant whose virtuous qualities in his early life were merely a mask for his true, malevolent nature, which was fully unleashed once he secured supreme power. Tacitus's prose is compelling, and his psychological insights are profound, but his account is fundamentally a hostile prosecution. He interprets every action of Tiberius through the darkest possible lens, attributing sinister motives to even his most seemingly benign decisions. While invaluable, his work must be read as a piece of powerful political rhetoric as much as a straightforward historical record, shaping a perception of Tiberius that has endured for centuries. Suetonius, in his The 12 Caesars, offers a different but equally problematic perspective. His biographical approach is less concerned with political analysis and more interested in character and personal gossip. He compiles stories of Tiberius's cruelty, his reclusiveness, and, most notoriously, the lurid tales of debauchery that were rumored to have taken place on Capri. While these accounts provide a fascinating glimpse into the perception of Tiberius among the Roman elite and the scandalous rumors that circulated about him, their historical accuracy is highly questionable. Suetonius often presents gossip as fact, creating a sensationalized portrait that has cemented the emperor's reputation as a depraved monster in the popular imagination, overshadowing his more tangible administrative achievements. Because of the pervasive bias in these literary sources, modern historians have had to adopt a more critical and nuanced approach. They have turned to other forms of evidence such as inscriptions, coinage, and archaeological findings to build a more complete and less prejudiced picture of his reign. This evidence often tells a different story, one of provincial stability, economic prosperity, and effective military management. By carefully weighing the hostile narratives of the ancient authors against the material evidence, a more complex and contradictory figure emerges. The challenge is to deconstruct the powerful myth created by his detractors without simply dismissing their accounts, and to understand why he was remembered with such bitterness by the very class that wrote the history books. Emperor Tiberius is a ruler defined by tragic contradiction. His reign was one of competence that fostered a climate of fear, leaving a legacy of imperial isolation and autocratic suspicion. Tiberius was an effective steward, preserving stability, but his failings created a toxic atmosphere, damaging his reputation and setting a dangerous precedent. His reluctance, perceived as arrogance, haunted his rule. Despite governing the empire successfully, a climate of fear grew. His withdrawal to Capri severed him from Rome, solidifying his image as a tyrant. Tiberius's legacy is a complex failure. He managed the empire but failed to manage its people. He left behind a stable empire and a legacy of fear. Tiberius Claudius Nero was born into a world in turmoil. His father, a staunch Republican, sided against Octavian. The family fled, facing constant danger. Their fortunes shifted when Tiberius's mother Livia caught Octavian's eye. Livia married Octavian, placing young Tiberius in the household of his family's former enemy. This childhood, marked by peril and dramatic reversals, shaped Tiberius. A child of the Republic's twilight, the shadows of that era would follow him, influencing his approach to power. Tiberius's identity was rooted in his lineage from the gens Claudia, one of Rome's most ancient patrician families. This instilled in him a powerful sense of aristocratic pride and a conservative disposition. This Claudian temperament stood in contrast to the Julian clan. It gave him the self-discipline that made him an exceptional military commander. This same aristocratic reserve was often perceived as coldness and arrogance. His Claudian blood made him a man of substance. It was his mother, Livia Drusilla, who provided the driving ambition that propelled the family into the imperial orbit. Livia was a woman of formidable intelligence and relentless determination. Her marriage to Octavian was a strategic alliance that secured the futures of her two sons, Tiberius and Drusus. Livia became Augustus's most trusted advisor. Her ambition became their destiny. Livia's influence over Tiberius was profound. She was the architect of his rise. Ancient sources hint at a relationship that was often strained. Growing up in Augustus's household placed Tiberius in an awkward position. He was surrounded by the immense power of the man reshaping the Roman world, but not by blood, a part of the Julian line. He received the finest education, but his status as stepson placed him on the periphery of Augustus's dynastic plans. Tiberius and his brother Drusus were the backup plan, secondary to the true Julian heirs. This created a complex relationship. Augustus recognized Tiberius's abilities, entrusting him with commands from a young age, but there seems to have been a lack of genuine warmth between them. Tiberius appears to have regarded Augustus with respect, duty, and perhaps resentment. The environment in Augustus's home was one of constant competition. This upbringing shaped his character, reinforced his reserve, and fostered cynicism. As Tiberius entered adulthood, the weight of dynastic expectation pressed down on him. Augustus needed capable family members as generals and administrators. Tiberius secured the empire's frontiers, upholding imperial prestige through military glory. His early military career was brilliant, demonstrating skill and loyalty. Yet victories were triumphs for Augustus. Pressure intensified in his personal life. He married Vipsania Agrippina, a loving marriage. Augustus shattered this happiness. Augustus compelled Tiberius to divorce Vipsania and marry Julia the Elder, a political move. This forced divorce was a turning point, a personal tragedy. The marriage to Julia was a disaster, bringing public humiliation. This experience cemented his view of politics as cruel, hardening his heart. Tiberius's entry into public life was managed by Augustus, who accelerated his career. At 17, he was appointed quaestor, marking his political journey. Augustus granted him the right to stand for higher offices earlier than legally mandated, a sign of imperial favor. He was dispatched to the east to resolve a point of national shame for Rome. He led a mission to Parthia to negotiate the return of legionary standards lost in Crassus's campaigns. He then proceeded to Armenia, where he installed a pro-Roman king. Eventually, he was appointed to his first consulship. He was building a reputation as a competent, reliable administrator, valued by Augustus. While his public career flourished, his private life was in turmoil, setting the stage for his unexpected decision to withdraw from public life. Tiberius's exile to Rhodes was a political gamble. Augustus relied on his grandsons Gaius and Lucius Caesar, the designated heirs. Tiberius became a political non-entity. But Augustus's succession plan unraveled. Lucius Caesar died, followed by Gaius. The forgotten Tiberius became the only option. Augustus adopted Tiberius, who in turn adopted Germanicus. This marked Tiberius's rise to power, born of tragedy, not ambition. He was now on the path to the throne. Following his adoption, Tiberius was thrust into imperial administration, his role elevated to Augustus's junior partner. This signaled to the Roman world, Tiberius was the designated successor. He shouldered the empire's military and administrative challenges, serving as acting emperor in the field. He quelled unrest in Germania and suppressed a revolt in Pannonia and Illyricum. After the Varian disaster, Tiberius stabilized the Rhine frontier. Tiberius proved his worth, becoming the empire's most accomplished general. In AD 13, his powers were renewed, making him a co-emperor. The final decade of Augustus's reign was defined by Tiberius's military activities, consolidating the empire. His focus was the northern frontiers along the Rhine and Danube. The Great Illyrian Revolt became the most serious military crisis Augustus faced. Tiberius waged a war of attrition. News arrived of the Varian disaster. Once again, Tiberius managed the crisis. He restored discipline and secured the border. These campaigns cemented his reputation as Rome's foremost general. He had saved the empire and secured Augustus's political legacy. In the summer of AD 14, Augustus's monumental reign was ending. At 75, his health failed. He put his affairs in order, with Tiberius involved. Augustus traveled to Nola, where his father had died. There, the first emperor of Rome would meet his end. Tiberius arrived in time for Augustus's final hours. On August 19, AD 14, Augustus died. His last words summarized his life's work. For Tiberius, this was the culmination of decades of service. The weight of the Roman Empire now rested on Tiberius's shoulders. The transition had finally arrived. Augustus's will named Tiberius as his heir. The funeral of Augustus was meticulously orchestrated. His body was cremated and an eagle was released. The Senate declared him a god, Divus Augustus. With Augustus deified, Tiberius formally accepted the powers of the princeps. This proved awkward, revealing differences between him and Augustus. He convened the Senate ostensibly to receive Augustus's powers. Tiberius hesitated, suggesting shared responsibilities, likely as a show of republican modesty. The senators saw weakness, not humility. Tiberius reluctantly agreed, refusing honorific titles. This became his first major political misstep, setting a tone of mutual suspicion with the Senate. He inherited the empire, but not Augustus's political touch, casting a dark shadow over his reign. Tiberius brought a cautious approach to the administration of the empire. One of his most significant contributions was his prudent handling of the imperial treasury. Tiberius was famously frugal, viewing the empire's finances as a public trust. In AD 33, during a severe financial crisis, Tiberius injected 100 million sesterces from his treasury into the banks. In his management of the Roman provinces, Tiberius largely continued the policies established by Augustus, focusing on stability. He was known for being particularly harsh on corrupt governors. This commitment to provincial welfare was summarized in his maxim that a good shepherd shears his flock, he does not flay it. The evidence from the provinces paints a picture of a reign marked by peace and competent administration. From the start, Tiberius's relationship with the Senate was fraught with tension. Tiberius wanted the Senate to be a genuine partner, but senators were unsure how to react, accustomed to imperial authority. This created a cycle of distrust. Treason trials became a toxic element. The law expanded to cover slander against the emperor. This created a climate of fear, poisoning Rome's political atmosphere. This difficult partnership became a defining negative legacy of his reign. He failed to forge consensus, allowing autocratic rule to fester. Tiberius adhered to Augustus's advice, avoiding reckless expansion. He strengthened the Rhine and Danube boundaries with fortifications and diplomacy. Germanicus, Tiberius's heir, campaigned in Germania, seeking to avenge prior defeats. Tiberius, wary of the cost, recalled him favoring diplomacy. His cautious foreign policy ensured peace and stability, preserving the empire. The Julio-Claudian dynasty's stability depended on a clear line of succession, a problem that plagued Augustus and would haunt Tiberius. Initially, Tiberius had his own son Drusus and his popular adopted son Germanicus. The sudden death of Germanicus in Syria was the first blow. Suspicion fell on Tiberius, and the trial of Piso did little to clear his name. With Germanicus gone, Tiberius turned to his son, Drusus. But this stability was shattered when Drusus also died suddenly. The loss of both heirs left Tiberius in a dynastic crisis. He became more reclusive and reliant on Sejanus, his praetorian prefect, setting the stage for intrigue and terror. In AD 26, Tiberius made a decision that altered his reign. He departed from Rome, never to return. He settled on Capri, governing the empire from his island fortress for 11 years. Weary of political struggles, Capri offered escape. His absence created a disconnect, with power shifting to Sejanus, his praetorian prefect. Isolation fueled paranoia, leading to unjust treason trials. Tiberius became detached from the consequences of his decrees. The retreat to Capri became a symbol of his failure as a ruler. With Tiberius away, Rome was managed by magistrates and the Praetorian Guard, led by Sejanus. His absence caused unease, disrupting rituals of power. The Praetorian Guard became a powerful force after Sejanus concentrated them in the Castra Praetoria. Sejanus used them to eliminate opponents, while the legal system suppressed dissent. Informers flourished, turning casual remarks into treason charges. Tiberius suppressed foreign cults and brigandage, but political terror overshadowed these efforts. Rome was held hostage by suspicion. With Tiberius's withdrawal to Capri, a vast power vacuum opened in Rome. This void was filled by Lucius Aelius Sejanus, prefect of the Praetorian Guard. He possessed boundless ambition and a talent for ingratiating himself with the emperor. Sejanus's power was built upon his command of the Praetorian Guard. Tiberius fueled this rise, signaling to the Senate that Sejanus's voice was his own. As his influence grew, so did his ambition, aiming to become a part of the Julio-Claudian line. The death of Livia removed the final check on Sejanus's power. He systematically began to eliminate rivals, plunging Rome into a period of political terror. The greatest threat to Sejanus's ambition came from the family of the deceased hero, Germanicus. His widow, Agrippina the Elder, was a proud and fiercely outspoken woman, a granddaughter of Augustus who believed her sons had the strongest claim to the throne. She openly despised Tiberius, whom she suspected of orchestrating her husband's death, and she made no secret of her contempt for the upstart prefect Sejanus. Her two eldest sons, Nero Caesar and Drusus Caesar, were popular young men seen by many as the natural heirs to the empire. For Sejanus, this entire faction represented a formidable obstacle that had to be systematically dismantled if he were ever to secure his own position at the pinnacle of power. Sejanus masterfully played on Tiberius's deepest insecurities and paranoia to turn the emperor against his own relatives. He fed the isolated ruler on Capri a steady diet of misinformation, twisting Agrippina's proud defiance into evidence of sedition and portraying her son's youthful ambitions as a direct plot against the emperor's life. He planted spies within Agrippina's household to report on every frustrated comment and every private conversation, which were then relayed to Tiberius in the most sinister light possible. The aging emperor, already deeply suspicious and nursing old resentments against Agrippina, proved to be fertile ground for these poisonous seeds. He came to see his grandnephews not as family, but as dangerous rivals manipulated by their treacherous mother. The attack began in earnest after Livia's death. In AD 29, on the basis of charges fabricated by Sejanus and approved by Tiberius, Agrippina and her eldest son, Nero Caesar, were arrested. The Senate, thoroughly intimidated by Sejanus, quickly condemned them. Agrippina was exiled to the barren island of Pandateria, the same place her mother Julia had been sent, where she was treated with great cruelty and eventually died of starvation, which she may have self-inflicted. Nero Caesar was exiled to the island of Pontia and was either executed or driven to suicide a year later. The purge continued with the arrest of the second son, Drusus Caesar, who was imprisoned in the dungeons of the Palatine Hill in Rome, where he would later starve to death under horrific circumstances. Through this brutal and systematic purge, Sejanus had effectively eliminated his most significant rivals. The house of Germanicus was left in ruins. Of Agrippina's 6 children, only 3 now survived: the youngest son, Gaius, better known as Caligula, and 3 daughters. Caligula himself only survived because he was deemed too young and insignificant to be a threat. He was eventually summoned by Tiberius to live on Capri, a virtual prisoner under the emperor's watchful eye. Sejanus had successfully cleared the path for his own ascent, destroying a whole branch of the imperial family in the process. The fall of Agrippina's house was a chilling demonstration of his power and the terrifying extent of Tiberius's paranoid decline. With Sejanus in control of Rome and Tiberius isolated on Capri, the law of treason, maiestas, was transformed into the primary political weapon of the regime. What had once been a law to protect the state from rebellion became a tool for eliminating personal enemies, silencing dissent, and confiscating wealth. A pervasive climate of fear descended upon the Roman aristocracy, as accusations could arise from the slightest pretext. An unguarded joke, a dream interpreted as disrespectful to the emperor, or simply being wealthy and having powerful enemies was enough to trigger a formal accusation. The network of professional informers, the delatores, grew rich and powerful, incentivized by the promise of receiving a portion of the condemned person's confiscated estate. The process of these trials revealed the complete breakdown of the partnership between the emperor and the Senate. Tiberius, in his remote paranoia, would receive the accusations and often sanction the prosecutions without a full or fair hearing of the evidence. The Senate, for its part, acted with what Tacitus describes as a race to servitude. Rather than exercising judicial restraint, senators often competed with one another to propose the harshest possible sentences, hoping this display of zealous loyalty would protect them from becoming the next target. This created a self-perpetuating cycle of terror, where fear drove sycophancy, and sycophancy fueled further prosecutions. The Senate was no longer a legislative body. It had become an instrument of its own persecution. The victims of these purges were not limited to the family of Germanicus. Prominent and wealthy senators, respected equestrians, and anyone perceived as having influence or harboring Republican sympathies could find themselves in the crosshairs. The historian Cassius Dio recounts how Sejanus targeted individuals like the wealthy equestrian Curtius Atticus, a friend of Tiberius, simply to seize his fortune. The trials were often swift, the verdicts predetermined, and the consequences absolute execution or forced suicide, followed by the seizure of all property by the state and the damnatio memoriae, the official erasure of the victim's name from all public records as if they had never existed. This reign of terror permanently scarred Tiberius's legacy. While some modern historians like Edward Togo Salmon argue that the total number of victims was exaggerated by hostile sources, the psychological impact on the Roman elite was undeniable. The fear was not necessarily of widespread indiscriminate slaughter, but of the arbitrary and unpredictable nature of the threat. No one felt truly safe. This period demonstrated the terrifying potential of an autocratic system when the ruler becomes detached and paranoid, and when intermediaries are allowed to wield the state's power without restraint. Tiberius may not have personally initiated every case, but his willing complicity and remote sanction made the climate of fear entirely his own creation. By AD 31, Sejanus stood at the absolute zenith of his power. He held the consulship alongside Tiberius himself, an unprecedented honor for an equestrian, and he was finally betrothed to Livilla, bringing him into the imperial family. He was, in all but name, the co-ruler of the Roman Empire, and many assumed it was only a matter of time before he was formally declared Tiberius's successor. However, his ambition had outpaced his caution. He began to see the aging emperor not as his patron, but as the final obstacle to his ultimate goal. Precisely what he plotted is unclear, but ancient sources agree that he began to scheme against Tiberius himself, perhaps planning to assassinate him and rule as regent for the young Tiberius Gemellus, his own future stepson. However, Sejanus had underestimated the complex web of loyalties within the imperial court. His plot was discovered and revealed to Tiberius, most likely by Antonia Minor, the mother of Germanicus and a woman of unimpeachable character and loyalty. Suddenly, the paranoid emperor had his worst fears confirmed. His most trusted partner, the man to whom he had delegated almost all his authority, was a traitor. Tiberius, however, could not act openly. Sejanus commanded the Praetorian Guard and had immense support in the Senate. A direct confrontation was too risky. Instead, the emperor began to move with a cunning and dissimulation that even Tacitus would have admired, carefully laying a trap for his powerful prefect. Tiberius began by sending a series of conflicting messages to Rome, In one letter to the Senate, he would praise Sejanus, while in the next he would include a minor criticism. He offered Sejanus a priesthood while simultaneously honoring one of his known enemies. This calculated ambiguity sowed confusion among Sejanus's supporters and kept the prefect off balance, unsure of his standing. The final move was a masterpiece of political theater. Tiberius appointed a new man, Gnaevius Sutorius Macro, to take command of the Praetorians, sending him to Rome with secret instructions. He then dispatched a long, rambling letter to be read aloud at a Senate meeting on October 18, AD 31, a meeting to which Sejanus had been summoned with the expectation of being granted tribunician power. As the letter was read, it began with praise for Sejanus before slowly turning to criticism, finally ending with a thunderous denunciation and an order for his arrest. While the senators were stunned into silence and Sejanus's supporters melted away, Macro swiftly secured control of the Praetorian Guard and surrounded the Senate House with loyal troops. Sejanus was arrested on the spot, led away to prison, and within hours was condemned and executed. His body was thrown onto the Gemonian stairs and torn to pieces by the enraged Roman mob. The Kingmaker had fallen, brought down by the very emperor he had sought to betray, in a sudden and brutal reversal of fortune that shocked the entire empire. The fall of Sejanus did not bring an end to the terror. It unleashed a new and even more ferocious wave of it. Tiberius, his paranoia now fully vindicated and, well, inflamed to an extreme degree, lashed out with unrestrained fury. He ordered a bloody purge of anyone and everyone connected to the fallen prefect. Sejanus's family, including his young children, were executed in a display of horrifying cruelty. His friends, allies, and anyone who had benefited from his patronage were systematically hunted down, put on trial, and condemned. The prisons of Rome swelled with the accused, and the Gemonian stairs were constantly littered with the corpses of those who had fallen from favor. The city was gripped by a bloodbath born of the emperor's vengeful rage. It was during this final dark period of his reign that Tiberius's mental and physical withdrawal became absolute. The betrayal by his most trusted confidant seemed to shatter what was left of his spirit, leaving behind a bitter, vindictive, and deeply isolated old man. He remained on Capri, a remote and brooding specter casting a long shadow of death over Rome. The empire continued to function largely on the administrative inertia established by Augustus, but the emperor himself had all but ceased to govern in any meaningful, proactive sense. His days were reportedly spent brooding over the death of his son, Drusus, whose demise was now revealed to have been a poisoning orchestrated by Sejanus and Livilla, a revelation that must have been the final unbearable blow. The historian Pliny the Elder famously described Tiberius as tristissimus hominum, the gloomiest of men, a label that honestly perfectly captures the character of his final years. He neglected the future of the empire, making no clear provision for his succession. He had two potential heirs in his grandsons, Caligula and Tiberius Gemellus. But he treated them both with a mixture of suspicion and contempt, doing nothing to prepare them for power. His public communications became rare and cryptic. According to Suetonius, his paranoia reached such a level that he had a complex system of lookouts and guards on Capri, and he would have anyone who approached the island without authorization tortured before being thrown from the cliffs. This final chapter of his life permanently cemented his reputation as a dark and monstrous tyrant. The prudent administrator of the early years was completely eclipsed by the paranoid recluse of the final decade. His reign, which had begun with reluctant duty, devolved into a grim spectacle of fear and retribution. He had outlived his enemies, his friends, and his own family, but at the cost of his reputation and perhaps his own sanity. As he approached his death in AD 37, he was a figure universally feared and despised by the Roman elite, a lonely old man whose long and complex life was ending in a haze of bitterness, cruelty, and profound despair. Tiberius's somber reign ended not on Capri but at Misenum in AD 37. The 77-year-old emperor fell ill. Accounts of his death vary. Tacitus claimed Tiberius briefly revived only to be smothered by Macro. Others suggest poison or a natural death. Regardless, the emperor was dead. A new, unpredictable era was about to begin. After Tiberius's death, all eyes turned to his will, which named his grandsons Caligula and Tiberius Gemellus as joint rulers. This was unworkable. The empire had no mechanism for dual rule. Caligula, backed by Praetorian prefect Macro, was escorted to Rome and met with celebration. The people celebrated the young, charismatic Caligula. Caligula swiftly consolidated power, nullifying Tiberius's will. Gemellus was disinherited and soon met his end. Caligula began his reign with popular measures, but little did they know, they had unleashed a terrifying tyranny. News of Tiberius's death unleashed wild celebration in Rome, crowds shouting, "To the Tiber with Tiberius," demanding his body be treated as that of a criminal. Caligula, aware that his own legitimacy depended on Tiberius, blocked the Senate's push to erase Tiberius's memory, instead granting him a state funeral but denying him divine honors. Tiberius's ashes joined the family he resented. His legacy left in limbo, honored in death, reviled in memory. The transition to Caligula was smooth, but Tiberius's reputation was left to the mercy of his enemies. The image of Tiberius as a depraved tyrant was shaped by senatorial historians, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio, who wrote decades after his death, each with their own agenda. Tacitus painted Tiberius as a master of hypocrisy. Suetonius indulged in scandalous gossip, and Dio echoed their hostility. Their works, filled with rumor and bias, defined Tiberius for centuries as the archetypal monster emperor. These accounts, more literary indictment than objective history, left little room for nuance. Only recently have historians begun to challenge this powerful, damning narrative. Modern historians have re-examined Tiberius, questioning the ancient sources and turning to archaeology and inscriptions for a fuller picture. Evidence shows his reign brought stability and effective governance to the provinces, even as Rome's elite suffered under treason trials. The terror was real but targeted, and the Senate itself played a complicit role. Tiberius emerges as a complex figure, a capable administrator but a poor politician, whose personal flaws had lasting consequences. Today he is seen less as a monster, more as a tragic, conflicted ruler caught between old ideals and new realities. Tiberius's retreat to Capri became a symbol of his supposed depravity, fueled by lurid tales from hostile sources like Suetonius. Stories of sexual perversion and cruelty were likely exaggerated, serving to delegitimize him in the eyes of Rome. In reality, Capri was more likely a place of isolation, paranoia, and administrative work than constant debauchery. The myth of Capri has overshadowed Tiberius's actual rule, becoming a lasting cautionary tale about the dangers of power and isolation. For many, Capri remains shorthand for the dark legend of Tiberius, a paradise turned private hell. Tiberius's reign set crucial precedents for imperial succession, exposing the fragility of Augustus's system. His reliance on powerful Praetorian prefects and the normalization of treason trials created dangerous models for future emperors. His withdrawal to Capri showed the empire could function without the emperor in Rome, but at great political cost. Tiberius's rule proved the system could survive its founder, but also revealed its deep vulnerabilities. The reluctant autocrat left a legacy of both stability and warning for all who followed. Ultimately, the legacy of Tiberius is a story of two distinct reigns. The first, a conscientious administrator governing with prudence. The second, a paranoid recluse, a remote tyrant. This is the Tiberius of Tacitus and Suetonius, consumed by paranoia. This contradiction is the challenge in understanding Tiberius. He was both capable and paranoid, the latter eventually overwhelming the former. Tiberius's legacy is a cautionary one, a tragic study in duty turning to darkness. The life of Emperor Tiberius defies any simple verdict. He remains a figure of unsettling contradictions. His legacy, administrative competence, and abject political failure. He sat at the helm of the Roman Empire for 23 years, a tenure marked by stability and creeping terror. He left the imperial treasury overflowing. He secured the empire's frontiers. He ensured peace and prosperity. But he failed to forge a working relationship with the Senate. He retreated from his capital. He sanctioned a wave of treason trials. He fostered a climate of fear. He was a deeply flawed man, tasked with an impossible job. He successfully preserved the empire, but he exposed the darkest potential of one-man rule. The story of Tiberius serves as a lesson in judging historical figures. Our perception has been shaped by ancient authors with a hostile agenda like Tacitus and Suetonius, who crafted a portrait of a tyrant. To form a complete picture, we must weigh hostile narratives against other evidence. The challenge of Tiberius is that he forces us to hold two opposing ideas, that a ruler can be both effective and tyrannical. Ultimately, Tiberius's story highlights the subjectivity of history itself. The reign of Tiberius cast a long and enduring shadow over the Roman Empire and, by extension, over the course of Western history. As the first man to inherit the position of emperor, his rule was a crucial test case that established precedents for centuries to come. He proved that the Principate, the system created by Augustus, could outlive its founder. The transfer of power, though awkward, was successful, and the machinery of the empire continued to function. This act of successful succession was perhaps his single most important contribution, ensuring the continuity of the imperial system and preventing the state from collapsing back into the chaos of civil war upon Augustus's death. The empire, he demonstrated, was now a durable institution, not merely the personal dominion of one man. However, the nature of his rule also set a series of dangerous precedents. His toxic relationship with the Senate became a recurring theme for future emperors, demonstrating the inherent conflict between the autocrat and the old aristocracy. His reliance on a powerful praetorian prefect created a model for court intrigue that would see prefects like Sejanus make and unmake emperors in the centuries that followed. Most ominously, his use of the treason laws and his descent into paranoid isolation provided a dark blueprint for imperial tyranny. Future emperors who wished to rule by fear rather than consensus had the Tiberian model to follow, a ready-made template for political purges and remote, unaccountable rule. Beyond the political precedents, Tiberius left a cultural and psychological imprint as well. He became an archetype, the gloomy tyrant, the reluctant ruler who finds power to be a miserable burden. His story has served as a cautionary tale for generations, a warning about the corrupting nature of absolute power and the dangers of political isolation. The myth of Capri, in particular, has become a powerful symbol of a leader's retreat from public responsibility into a private world of vice and cruelty. He represents the dark side of the Augustan settlement, the ever-present potential for the imperial system to curdle from a beneficent autocracy into a paranoid despotism, dependent entirely on the character and whims of the man at the top. In the end, Tiberius's legacy is as complex and contradictory as the man himself. He was the necessary successor who ensured the empire's survival, but also the flawed ruler who revealed its deepest vulnerabilities. He was a figure of immense historical importance, not always for what he did, but often for what he represented and the precedents he set. He stands as a permanent reminder that stability can come at the price of freedom, and that the shadows of a ruler's personality can stretch long after they are gone, shaping the world in ways they could never have intended. The gloomy emperor is gone, but the questions raised by his troubled reign about power, justice, and the nature of leadership continue to haunt us. Thanks for making it to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video. How about hitting the like and subscribe button to be notified when we upload more videos on historical figures? And as always, thanks for watching.